Last week, we entered into the story of the Lord's Diner, a story of Christian service at its best. And it's really beautiful. That's the fourth pillar that we're going to talk about, is the idea of Christian service. The men last week, as you know, were challenged to go do something for somebody and to receive no glory and to really not even talk about it at all, which is obviously why we're not going to share that tonight. But what I'd like for you to do is to really break open for us this idea of Christian service, further, a little deeper than a service project, where service actually becomes a way of living and a decision that we make each day in our lives.
And that service pillar, Joe, is not just external. And what's fascinating on the Lord's Diner and those who work there is that often the first time they came, they think that they were actually going to give something to those who were coming to be fed. But time and time again, we hear how they receive something from the act of giving. Internally, what does service bring about? Jesus said, when you pray, go to your room and pray to your Father in secret, so that no one knows. Close the door. When you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. When you fast, don't let people see that you're doing that. There's something that Jesus is teaching us in this, that it's something internal that is going to transform the heart more into the life of Christ. Father Capon did that in so many ways, and we see time and time again the many examples of service that he gave to his boys. But what was at his heart that allowed him and compelled him to do that? And it was truly imitating Christ, that you do it as a servant of the servants. Interestingly, as a priest of Jesus Christ, we're not supposed to be in glory, look at me. No, I'm supposed to be, and even the Pope, one of the titles that we use for Pope Francis is servant of the servants. And humility is at the heart of true service. It's not for the sake of, look at what I did. It's, what am I giving without anyone noticing? And that is where I think the heart is stretched the more. And if, in fact, for Capon's men, we begin to recognize not just what we're doing in service, but what is the intention that underlies that. And when I'm doing it totally in humility, not by pride or not by hoping that someone's going to say, hey, great job, but when I'm doing it simply because it's the right thing to do, that is really growing as a disciple of Christ. And I think Father Capon showed that many times over.
Now, so many of these men, so many of us men, we go to work and we want to be servant leaders, and we possibly look for examples or role models of that in the world. But how would you lead us to become servant leaders? Because most of the men that watch this, many of them are leaders in their businesses, their communities, and certainly in their families. How would you challenge us to live that at a deep level as a man?
And I don't want anybody to get in trouble in their workplace, but I am a visual person, and earlier in the series we spoke of the face of Christ and that crucifix. I am a firm believer, and I keep this on my desk, that when in fact I'm typing and something just doesn't seem to be going right, or the phone rings and it's someone that's complaining, or someone comes to the office at the door and has some interruption, when I know that I'm becoming agitated or distracted internally, and again, it's not that which is seen outside, it's that which is within, that's when I take a glance at that crucifix and I realize that is who I am supposed to be imitating. Again, I go back to something Mother Teresa taught me. She gave a retreat, Joe, in 10 words. She held up a crucifix and said, he did this for me, I do what for him. And I suggest, and again, I hope that this is not going to get anybody fired by having a crucifix on your desk at work, but I need to have something visual that I can see. And again, I find it fascinating that that crucifix was what those prisoners of war needed after the death of Father Capon, that spirit of what Father Capon was helping them to hold on to in service, to continue to encourage. It's cold during that winter, very cold, and many just were giving up hope. And they were just saying, I'm going to die, I'm going to give up. Or to pick the lice off, or to give rations for food to somebody that was, well, this guy's close to death, we're just going to dismiss him. No. And Father Capon continued to stress that to them. And in service, they began to not only externally recognize the transformation of their heart, but they started to internally be stretched more into the heart of Christ, even after Father Capon's death. That is what we're trying to do with Capon's men.
It sounds to me, yet again, that the challenge for this week really flows out of what you're challenging the men to do at a deep spiritual level.
Looking at the intention, not just the external act of service, but what is lying in the heart.
And what would you say is the most humble action a person could take as it relates to becoming a humble servant leader?
And Joe, what is the obstacle to growing in humility? Pride. And I challenge myself, and I remember this in seminary. Our professor said, the best confessor is a good penitent. And if I do not make use of that sacrament of reconciliation to receive the gift of God's mercy, to combat and uproot pride, then I'm not really going to grow in that love of Christ. And so I encourage guys to make use of this sacrament. You know, the reasons why people don't go to confession, and I've asked this over the years, when someone's been away a long time and I'll ask, what kept you away so long? The most common response is fear. I'm fearful that God won't forgive me, or I'm fearful that I've done something so bad that God can't forgive me. I'm fearful that I'm going to continue to fall into this same sin again. Fear is often the reason that keeps us away from that sacrament of forgiveness.
That, Father, leads us exactly to where we want to go this week. The challenge this week is to really step outside of ourselves and to go and to track down our parish priest or a priest in another parish and to humbly submit to him in the sacrament of reconciliation that we are an imperfect person, and to allow him to do really what he was ordained to do, which is to live in his service of humankind.
We don't know a lot about, obviously Father Capon couldn't share in his writings what happened in the sacrament of confession, but he did carry that stole with him. And he heard the confessions of those guys because, again, war gives death a face. And when you're in the midst of war, you're beginning to look at your life. We're in war, too, in terms of our spiritual combat in the world. Don't we need to turn to the Lord to give us the strength to overcome the times in which we failed so that we have hope to continue to move forward?
So this week, we take some time. We go, we make an appointment, and we ask the Lord to forgive us so that we might go back into our families, our businesses, our communities, and be the servant leaders that we're called to be.
That sounds like a perfect challenge.